remember learning the key question words back in elementary school? You got who, what, when, where, why, how. You had to interrogate current events. It's by learning those key ways of asking questions that we figure out more about how the world is, about who we are. Absent asking questions, we kind of miss going to the deeper level of life. And while there may be no stupid questions, there are sometimes questions that help us unpack the truth more readily than other questions. Perhaps you've had it that there's a problem, and you just kind of keep asking the same questions about it and getting nowhere, and then one day it hits you, you've been asking the wrong question about it, and the whole thing kind of unlocks. Maybe you've had this experience. I think for most of our gospel reading today, our friends in that story spend their time asking all the same kinds of questions and getting nowhere. They're just kind of spinning their wheels in a tired circle. Everyone in the story gets really, really obsessed about who is the blind man and how was he healed and who was Jesus and what happened. And it starts from the very beginning. But if you want to think about this story as a series of scenes, the tension just builds as the questions build. So you start with Jesus, who makes the mud and puts it on the guy's eyes, and as he tells it, I went and I washed and I came back seeing. And when he gets back, his community should be so excited for him, because being blind meant he had to beg and his life was miserable. But instead, they debate who he is. I don't know, is it the same guy? I don't know, I don't think it's the same guy. Maybe it's the same guy, is it that guy? It's kind of like a Albert and Costello act a little bit. In the middle, the guy is like, it's me. No, it would be funny, except it's tragic. It's that kind of humor that is tragic because they've looked at him so little. He was such an object to pass by, they don't even know if it's him or not. They've looked at his face so little. And now that he's among them trying to explain who he is, they're also not listening to him. There's a tragedy in that. And because they don't believe him, or they can't agree about it, despite his testimony, they take him one better to the authorities. And now it's up to the Pharisees to decide who he is. And the Pharisees are at least a little more curious. They want to know how it happened. Well, this man Jesus, he made this mud and he put it on my eyes and I went and I washed and I see. Wait. Wait, how? No, that can't be right. And who are you again? And do you know where Jesus is? No. Okay, well, let's verify this by calling in your parents, right? That's kind of the ultimate. So they come in, and in an insult to this man who knows who he is, they now ask his parents, who don't want to ask, and who say, ask him. And then the Pharisees finally agree that this is a man who was born blind, but now he sees, so now it's time for the serious interrogation chair. Tell us the truth. As if he's been telling them anything else, for a second time, for a third time. And in the story, the blind man even says, like I've already told you, Jesus, blind, wash, see. And the Pharisees, they don't like that answer, but they just keep asking how it was and who he is and who Jesus is. And then it becomes about where Jesus is. And we're back to a question about sin. And I admire the blind man born blind, who now sees, gets gutsier with each progressive time. Don't you want to be, are you asking me because you want to be his disciples? No. And so the Pharisees have spent all this time asking how and who and what and where, and it's getting them no new information. They're just going in a tragic circle. But instead of asking a new question, they decide they'll make up an answer, right? No, you're a sinner, he's a sinner, he healed on the Sabbath, get out of here. And that's the end of the story. No one learns anything new. They miss all of the truth in the story. And I've reduced it a little, but that's pretty much what happens. And what I think is interesting is that there's like all these back and forths and all this opportunity, and no one asks one of the most important question words. No one asks why. Not once. Does anyone in this story bother to ask why? I think that you have a clue to that at what is kind of the prologue to all the scenes. That's the very beginning, when Jesus first sees. So the whole story begins with Jesus saw a man born blind. Do you know he's the only person in the story that actually sees the humanity of this man? Even the disciples then turn him into a theological problem. Oh, you know what, Jesus? We've been meaning to ask. Like, people who are blind, did they sin or did their parents sin? And Jesus says, no, nobody sinned. I'll tell you what's more important. Why? So that the glory of God can be shown in his life. And then the whole rest of the story, everyone repeats the problem of the disciples. No one asks why. And maybe it seems evident. Well, Jesus healed him because he was blind. Duh, Melinda. That's the why. Except that, like, in this story, there's no, like, the man doesn't cry out. If you read through a bunch of other gospel stories, your spare time, you can see that there's lots of blind men who cry out to Jesus, Jesus, Master, have mercy on me. And lepers come running for help, and people dig through a roof so their paralytic neighbor can get healed. They're all asking something of Jesus. Please heal me, and Jesus does. But in this case, blind man says nothing. Jesus sees him. So why does Jesus heal him? Because it is the mission of the Son of God to heal and make well. Not about the guy's faith. It's not about the guy's sin or lack of sin. It's not about what he's going to do with his life. It's about Jesus Christ seeing the man is not whole and making him whole. That's the why. And then if you want to get more curious, you could say, oh, why did he do it? Well then, okay, let's ask, how did he do it? Oh, interesting. Yes, the guy went and washed and came home seeing, but Jesus, he takes the stuff of the earth, right? He spits on the ground and makes a mud. Sounds a lot like Genesis, where God, in the second chapter, takes and makes an earth creature out of the mud. And you know, the man born blind says, never since the beginning of the world has anyone heard of someone being blind getting their sight back. It's because it's not a restoration. It's an act of creation. Mud, God creates vision in the man's eyes. Wow, so who is this? Well, this isn't just a prophet. This is Jesus Christ, alive with the absolute brilliance and power and love of God walking the earth. So what really happened here? The glory of God concretely manifested in this man having his body made whole. See? You ask the right questions or a different question, and it's a whole different way of seeing the story. And in John, the Gospel of John, these aren't miracles, they're signs. They're signs that reveal who Jesus is. And the people in this story, most of them miss the sign because they keep asking the same redundant questions. And I take this as a lesson because sometimes I find that I ask the same redundant questions about my own spiritual life or about God. It's not that they're bad questions or stupid questions, it's that I just keep asking the same ones and it keeps going in a cycle that gets me nowhere different. And it seems to me that part of spiritual growth is inviting the Spirit to kind of invite us into an inquisitiveness, to ask different questions about our lives that open up new understanding and new meaning. To make this a little more concrete, a couple of examples maybe. Maybe it's not the question of how do I stop the problematic behavior, but what is driving it in the first place? What is the piece of brokenness in me that needs healed? Maybe it's not why is this sorrow or this depression or this illness happening to me? Maybe it's who is present for me right now? Maybe it's not, what do I need to do better to make God show up in my life? What thing do I need to stop doing? Maybe it's, who is God calling me to be? Doesn't mean that the first question of any of those examples is wrong or bad. It just means sometimes they can cycle out. We have to figure out a different vantage point. Change the question we're asking about the situation in order to see where God is in it differently. And at the end of our gospel reading, Jesus hears the man's been driven out, and he goes to find him. And for the first time, someone actually questions the blind man and listens to his response. I think that's the whole point of Jesus coming back and asking him what he thinks about the Son of Man. He wants to give the blind man a choice. And the blind man says, yeah, who is he that I may believe? It's not fact-finding. It's not trying to just get an answer. He's open-hearted. Who is he? And Jesus says, you know, you've seen him. And I am he. And the text says, the man saw him. Lord, I believe. And the truth of this text is that it all begins by Jesus seeing him, and then it ends with the man seeing Jesus. Enabled at the end by asking a really interesting question about who Jesus is that changes how the man understands him. And maybe that's true for every one of us, that we have been seen by Jesus already. The man at the beginning doesn't see Jesus, he's blind. Jesus sees him, and Jesus sees us whether we know it or not. And the glory of God is present in our lives, probably in the most ordinary ways, but it's there. And sometimes it just takes walking around and asking some new questions and the Holy Spirit finding us for then us to really see Jesus and offer worship. And I think that's the prayer of this story. Having been seen by God, having been offered wholeness, having been loved, may we draw near to God. May we ask the questions the Spirit inspires us so that we too may see Jesus and worship.